Hello, I'm Marcus Anthony, and today I'm going to be talking about this little book here called The Genius in All of Us by David Shenk. Now basically I'm going to say that this is a great book, and I think it makes a great and important contribution to knowledge. Now the first thing you should know about The Genius in All of Us is that it's not really a scientific book in the sense that it tries to make both sides of an argument. It's basically a presentation of the evidence which suggests that intelligence is a function of the interaction between genes and environment. And in David Shenk's case, he argues that the environment plays a greater role in the expression of intelligence. So right at the beginning of the book he says, intelligence isn't fixed, intelligence isn't general, intelligence is not a thing. Intelligence is a dynamic, diffuse and ongoing process. So he sticks to that thesis throughout the entire book. Now, I basically agree with his thesis, so I couldn't call myself an impartial investigator either. I've written a few books about intelligence myself. Now, the good thing about the book is that it's very well written, it's very lucid. The first half of the book, about 130 pages, covers Shenk's basic thesis, and it includes lots of interesting anecdotes and examples. And the second half of the book, which is about another 150 or so pages, includes the evidence and expands and it gives more references. I found both parts of the book quite interesting, but some people may just prefer to read the first half. If that's the case, then I think you'll still find it a very worthwhile read. I think people that are not necessarily trained in the area of intelligence theory or are particularly interested in science will find this book quite readable. Shenk doesn't argue that genetics play no part in intelligence. He just says that the case for genetics is overstated in much of the popular press and in some of dominant science as well. So basically he's just saying that the environment plays a greater role. Okay? And he quotes Patrick Bateson from Cambridge University as saying, "The genes merely store information, coding for amino acid sequences of proteins. That's all. They don't code for parts of the nervous system, and they certainly don't code for particular behaviour patterns." And I think that's a reasonable statement for him to say, because something as complex as human behaviour and intelligence cannot be simply reduced to genetics, I don't think. Okay. There's some interesting things that he talks about in the book. He talks about giftedness or genius, and basically he says that working hard and on a particular area is extremely important in order for a natural or innate ability to express itself. That's pretty common sense. And he uses some interesting examples, such as the case of Mozart. Now, Mozart sometimes is presented as being an archetypal case of genius expressing itself naturally. Actually, according to what the evidence that Shenk presents here, Mozart had a very stimulating environment. His parents exposed him to music at a very young age, and so he had all the environmental cues to enable him to express that development, or that natural or innate ability within himself. Other things, he talks about the Flynn effect, the intriguing development or understanding which comes from the history of intelligence, that IQ scores are going up about 3 points every generation. And he points out that if intelligence is purely genetic, then how is it that people are scoring higher on IQ tests with every increasing or every succeeding generation? And this is a particularly, I think it's a pretty good argument actually. And one of the factors that he suggests is contributing to the increase in intelligence over generations is what he calls shorthand abstractions, or SHAs. And these are things like natural selection, percentage, random sample. These kind of concepts, even though we think of them as normal today, were not around that long ago. So those things are contributing to intelligence increasing. And that's another piece of evidence that intelligence may not necessarily be merely a result of genetics or natural ability. Okay. What Shenk basically argues in the end is that, and I'll quote him here, is that the developmental paradigm, or the idea of intelligence, will require not just a new intellectual leap, but a moral, spiritual and psychological leap. And I happen to agree with him there. He doesn't perhaps go quite as far enough as what I think he could. Because what well, there's a slight contradiction in his thesis here, because he says that intelligence, or the expression of intelligence, is purely a function of the interaction between genes and environment. But he doesn't really explore some of the more interesting domains of intelligence, or that may be able to fit in with the definition of environment. For example, personal intention or willpower. Surely this also affects physiology, and if it affects physiology, then it's going to affect the expression of genes in the phenotype or the physical being, and also the behaviour of the individual. And the second area that I think he could have expanded more into is the intriguing area of consciousness itself. And this includes, I think, the recent evidence into the extended mind, or the idea that intelligence and consciousness express themselves beyond the physical brain, and that maybe interaction between individuals and environment at a quantum level, or maybe a level of a psychic interaction, or what's called psi. This is a very interesting area. It's not as far out as what some people think. For example, a recent paper in Nature by Elisabetta Collini and some colleagues, just February this year, indicated that there were quantum interactions occurring in cellular structures. And this is a very important development, I think. And it's an area that Shenk could have got further into. But I can't blame Shenk for not getting into that area. After all, it's a bit of a stretch already to suggest that intelligence is basically more a function of environmental influences than pure genetics. He's pushing the boundaries, but I think he could have pushed them a little bit further. But that's just my personal take on it. So in summary, I think this is a really good book. It's very readable. I think people will enjoy it, including people who are not experts in the field. So I give it 5 stars. And that's about all. And I think I should also give a bit of a thanks here to David Shenk, who even answered some of my own emails that I sent to him, which I think shows that he's also quite a personable writer and author. That's all for today.